guys in. A lot of people have questions on if they should go and get their master's, if they should go on and get their law degree. I know that all of you have done this while you were working, or you started working in the legislature and decided to go that route. So it just gives people some different kind of objectives on what's out there and what can be done. I'd like to start off today. I'm just going to have each one of you tell a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are. We talk about Justice Clement being, on your bio here, being in the governor's office, but it all started way back in the Senate years ago. And you took a long road to get to where you are today, and everyone did. And there were good times and there was bad times. And I hope that we can all touch on that. But it's an honor to have you here. So I'm just going to ask each one of you to kind of talk maybe for about 5 minutes or so and tell a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today. And then let's open it up and let's have people ask questions, or we will just keep talking like we're at a round table if no one wants to ask any questions. I know sometimes people get a little nervous, but let's just see what we can do today to kind of encourage someone to kind of go a little further with their career. So who would like to start? I'm going to start with, all right, Justice Clement.
I'll start. Well, thank you, Staci, and thank you, Arnold. I am so excited to be here today to answer your questions. But the thing that I'm the most excited about is this incredible panel that I get to serve on. I have known and worked with Emily and Michelle for 20 years, maybe a little bit longer than that, Emily.
Don't tell them how old we are. What do you
know. And although I have not had the opportunity to work personally with Shaquilla, she has an incredible reputation with the Supreme Court because of all of her amazing work with the Lieutenant Governor on the jail pretrial task force. So thank you, Shaquilla. That it's been incredible, and the Chief Justice is obsessed with you. So I'll just start with that. I'm happy to go first because I think me having served in all three branches of government maybe can like kick this off and talk about what all of those options are. So the day after I graduated from high school, I started working for the Michigan Republican Party years and years ago. That's where I first met Emily. And I worked there all through undergrad. I finished my last semester of undergrad working for a lobbying firm, and then went on to work for a senator in the Senate, and did a variety of things. I was the front desk person, but I was able to clerk for the Judiciary Committee, and really got an interest in, I'd always known that I wanted to go to law school, but it really kind of outlined for me what a lot of those options were. And I think maybe more importantly, my recollection is at that time there was one female attorney in the Michigan Senate, and that really spoke to me because I saw an opportunity, and I was surprised by that, and maybe a little disheartened. So I left and went to law school, and I actually did not work in government at all while I went to law school. When I was in law school, I had always planned on going back to government service, but I took one amazing class about family law, and I loved it. And so when I graduated, I actually practiced in private practice for a little over 4 years, doing family law issues like divorce, custody, and child welfare and juvenile justice issues. Then I went back to work in the Michigan Senate, and I was assigned to do a variety of things as an attorney. And it was transportation, local and government affairs, health services. I worked on the Judiciary Committee and budget for a number of years, and then I also did advise and consent at the tail end of my time with the Senate. Then I went to work for the Governor Snyder, as his deputy legal counsel is where I started. I was there for about, I think it was 3 years, and then was asked to take over as deputy chief of staff. And I can, if there's questions about, more specific about what I learned from all of these things, that was a really important career move for me. I had always been kind of the attorney behind the scenes, someone that was happy to answer questions, draft things, and provide information, but I was not really comfortable being kind of out there interacting with people. I'm kind of an introvert, and it wasn't my favorite thing to do. So I really had to push myself out of my comfort. I did that position for a little over 2 years, and then I went back to the legal division and served as the governor's chief legal counsel for the remainder of my time with the governor. Then I was appointed in 2017 to the Michigan Supreme Court. I was elected the following year. And so since the time of my appointment, in addition to all of the legal work that we do with the cases that come through, one of my favorite parts of the job is the administrative work that the court does. And it allows me to take all of the things that I've just told you from before I went to law school, and then in private practice, and then being in the legislature and the governor's office, and I continue to do all of those things. I'm the liaison, the co-liaison with Justice Kavanaugh on child welfare issues, and the liaison on juvenile justice issues and problem-solving courts, as well as the Michigan Judicial Institute, which is our training arm for judges to train new judges and current judges on the changes in the law and things that they should be doing. So it's really kind of come full circle, as Staci said. It has been a long road here, and I have loved every single job that I've had. It has not been without its negatives at times. But when I talk to people about, either going to law school or looking at an advanced degree, or even just talking to them about where they're at in their career and where they may want to go, I've had a lot of people talk to me about when is the right time to move on, and how do you know that, or people that aren't happy in the jobs that they're at, and so I'm looking forward to your questions about that, and in any way that I can be helpful.
Thank you, Justice Clement. Shakila, would you like to go?
Sure, I'll go next. Justice Clement, thank you for the kind words. I've heard good things about you as well. And I thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel, Arnold and Staci. Funny, I've worked with Michelle Lang in one capacity or another my whole career, whether it's in the Senate, when she was in the executive office. She will tell you her resume. I won't spoil it for you, but it's kind of funny that you never know where your paths will cross and where they will continue to cross. Emily, it's nice to meet you. I look forward to hearing more about you as well. A little bit about me. I am a double alum from Oakland University. I have a bachelor's in health science and a master's in public administration. The master's in public administration is actually what led me from the nonprofit world to working in politics. I worked for a domestic violence agency in Oakland County for about a year, and I did court-ordered supervised visitation. And that's kind of a weird place to start because I was in my mid-20s, but it's what pushed me into politics. This was not the goal. With a health science degree, I thought I'd be a physical therapist, and I'm very far from that. So I was at a nonprofit right where I wanted to be as I was finishing up grad school, decided that I wanted to make a greater impact, and that policy was where that impact should be. And just kind of was in the right place at the right time to land in Lansing. It was in 2008. There was a presidential campaign that year, and there was a lot of change in Democratic staffing. So I landed a job with the Senate Democrats doing policy. I was initially hired to do families and DHHS policy because of my background in, I had done some other nonprofit work, and I had this health degree. I have not done DHHS nor families policy at all, ever. So there were some staffing changes before I started, and I ended up doing transportation, much like you, Justice Clement. I did local government. Back when there was a history, arts, and libraries budget. I was the person that did that. I've done a bunch of like kind of things that don't match, but worked out to lead me where I am today. So for about a decade, I handled transportation policy and the budget, which also ultimately led me to where I am now. I did that for about 8 years and took a job with Senator Ananick when he became the minority leader as his legislative director. In 2018, after the governor won election, I was invited to be a part of her Fix the Damn Roads team for policy because, as she likes to tell people, I have designed or worked on every road funding plan that she's probably ever presented. So I was working the transition team when I was introduced to the Lieutenant Governor. Him being a newcomer to politics, he had consulted a number of people around town about who he should think about hiring. My name came up a few times and we sat down and we kind of hit it off, and here I am. So that's a very condensed version of how I got here. But honestly, I will say one of the things that has always been helpful were some very basic lessons that I learned probably from some of my early colleagues that have moved on, right? Like, you know, doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican, you know, relationships matter. I have a lot of, you know, Republican friends around town. I have a lot of Dem friends. We're all people. Politics, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to do a good job. We want to make Michigan a better place. Let's start where we agree. And so that's a lot of what my guiding principles have been. We start where we agree. You're usually not that far apart. And sometimes you meet in the middle, and sometimes you meet further to the left, sometimes you meet further to the right, but the objective is to get something done. So that's kind of been my guiding principle. I look forward to your questions about how when I decided to move, how did I make those decisions? I honestly had people asking me for years, like, why are you still at the Senate? Why are you still at the Senate? And I applied for a lot of jobs, but they didn't always feel right, or I didn't get the job offer, or right. And so that decision sometimes is not always as clear cut. So I look forward to talking more about that. But that's a really quick synopsis about me.
Thank you, Shaquilla. Appreciate that. Emily?
Thank you, Staci, and thank you for having me today. I'm going to start with the fact that I grew up in a small town in Southwest Michigan, and I went to CMU to study fire up chips, if there's any Chippewas out there, in addition to Spartans. I went to Central to study journalism and thought I was going to be a reporter, and I had a political science minor, and I did an internship, which is how I met Justice Clement. We were interns together at the state Republican Party. And I got the political bug enough to say, like, no, I don't want to go be a journalist. I want to go work in communications, in the communications field within politics. So I started then with House Republicans after I graduated from college. And I was, for those of you who are on staff, I was a central staff writer. I was assigned to a handful of lawmakers to be there, you know, to do their communications work. Then eventually I worked up to be the press secretary for the speaker. At the time, it was Speaker Rick Johnson. But really the common theme, I think, throughout my career is that I like to challenge myself. And after I kind of term limited myself out, after 6 years, I decided I had been doing that long enough. And the new challenge for me was to join a public relations agency that was opening a Lansing office. Actually, Arnold and I worked on staff together too, as I'm thinking about that. To go work for a public relations agency that was opening a Lansing office to focus on issue advocacy. And it was at that time that I decided to get my master's, because I had not formally studied public relations in college. And also because I was joining the private sector and I wanted to learn more about running business and, you know, how this is a commercial industry and how to make it grow. So I did issue advocacy for 10 years based out of Lansing, not political campaigns for people, but the ballot initiatives and local initiatives and things moving through the legislature. And after 10 years of doing that, I needed a challenge again. And the opportunity came up for me to go to the MEDC the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and be the vice president for marketing and communications. And that was appealing to me because I felt like I wasn't really learning a lot about marketing and advertising in my issue advocacy role. The clients I had did not give me that type of experience. So I loved my job at the MEDC. I love our state. I love the ability to go around and promote our state, whether that was tourism through the Pure Michigan campaign, through business attraction. At the time, talent was still a part of the MEDC. So doing the early research behind how we could engage in talent attraction efforts or talent retention efforts for our state. And I did love that. But again, a challenge came knocking, and I had an opportunity to come to Michigan State and be their vice president for communications and the spokesperson during a really difficult crisis time. So some would call me crazy, but again, I do like those challenges. And I've been here at Michigan State now for 3 years, and it's been a wonderful journey. So thank you for having me today. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of a panel of such amazing, powerful women.
Thanks, Emily. Michelle?
Did you save me for last because my resume is the longest because some people would suggest perhaps I can't keep a job? No, I'm just kidding.
It's because you have a big story to tell, and it's awesome.
Thank you so much for having us today. I think this really is actually, probably the best panel that I have ever sat on. I'm surrounded by all my friends here, so it's excellent. My story is long. I will try to keep it very condensed. I've held a number of roles across state government, but I started as an intern in the Michigan Senate way back in 1998 and wound up working full-time my senior year at Michigan State for a senator from Bay City. From there, my responsibilities grew from answering constituent letters and things along those lines to working on actual appropriations for him. I ran a Senate race back in 2002, and at the time, I think it was one of the most expensive Michigan Senate races that ever had occurred, and it was $1 million race. And back in the day, that was like unheard of. And I worked for Tony Thomas won, and then I worked for him for about 2 years, and I got a call from the majority leader's office. They were looking to fill a position for someone doing appropriations for the majority leader. And I accepted that role. And then that led me to 2 years with Senate Majority Leader Ken Sikkema, and then almost 4 years with Mike Bishop when he was the Senate Majority Leader, doing the same thing, all appropriations work for them. From Mike's office, I decided to take a little turn outside of government, but still connected to government, and I lobbied for Oakland University. That's one of Shaquila and I's connections. I lobbied for them for 5 years, and after 5 years, it was evident to me that I needed to continue to grow, and that probably was not going to happen in that space. And so I reached out to my good friend Beth Clement, who is on this panel, and asked her if she knew of anything that I would be good for back in state government. And she said, I absolutely do. You should talk to the then director of DTMB, David Bean. He's looking for a new legislative liaison. That occurred. I went through the process, got that position, and then about 7 or 8 weeks later, I got a phone call from Governor Snyder's office telling me that their deputy director for legislative affairs, who worked with the House, was leaving, and was I interested in that position? And I think my words to then Dick Posthumous were, "I'm smart enough to know you don't say no to the governor's office." And so away I went after about 8 weeks at DTMB, and I served in Governor Snyder's staff for 3.5 years in that role, obviously most of his last term. And then when he was done, I was appointed to the Michigan Tax Tribunal to be a tax judge, which I very quickly learned, tax law was not for me, even though I had, taken a little bit of it in law school, which I forgot to mention in this story. I started law school when I was working for Tony Thomas. I decided to go in the evenings at Michigan State, and I did it because, one, I was a little bored, and two, I thought I needed to have a skill set to fall back on should someone lose a majority or an election or a leadership race. I needed to be able to do something, even though I loved being in the Senate. I needed to be able to do something outside of that, should something occur. So that took me 5 years. I graduated in 2008, but I worked for, as I said, I worked for Governor Snyder. He appointed me to the tax tribunal. I realized that was not going to be an excellent place for me to work. You know, tax law is kind of dry. And so then Trish Foster was the director of DTMB, and she was looking for a chief of staff. And I made my way back to DTMB and was her chief of staff while she was the director. She was then called to Governor Whitmer's office to be the first state COO, and she's been handling obviously quite a bit of the things related to COVID-19. In August of 2020, she needed some help, and so I kept my role at DTMB and then wound up doing some work for Governor Whitmer and Trish and her team. So that was it was a really exciting thing to be part of. And then as of most recently, I think Monday it was official, I am now the chief deputy at DTMB, and I only have one job. So the long story short of how I got to where I am is that I don't say no to anything. I say yes to all opportunities apparently that are presented to me. And it's been an amazing career path and journey so far. I've been able to do a lot of really, really interesting things.
And let's point out here too, with Michelle working for Schneider and then coming back and working for Whitmer. You guys, we talk about, the Republicans and Democrats and everything. It is all about relationships, and it's all about doing your job and what's right out there for Michigan. And that's something that they've recognized in Michelle. And she's just top notch, and she gets it, and she's going to do the job, just like we all are. And that's just one thing that really impresses me with all of you guys.
Staci, where do you want me to send you the check for saying such nice things about me on this panel?
I am just so blessed to be able to, call all of you guys my friend as well. And, spent years together, working together and not working together. And it's still just seamless that we can still just call each other and, hey, would you like to do this? And everyone says, yes.
Well, Staci, everyone says yes to you because of the relationships that you built, years ago. And I mean, it's just one of those things that we all know. If Staci asks us to do something, it's for a good reason, and that you're just trying to help the next generation that's coming through. So I'm always happy.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I totally agree with that.
Same. I mean, Staci, you and I used to run into each other on the street, and I didn't know where you worked. We'd always chat. We'd run into each other and have a drink, and then I didn't know you worked for Republic. It didn't matter, right? And so it's absolutely the relationship. And I mean, to Michelle's point, I have rarely said no to an opportunity, even if it scared me. I had no plans on being chief of staff to the lieutenant governor. What does a lieutenant governor do? Like, I knew, but I didn't know. And so this was not a plan, and I was scared to death to take the job. I took the job. I am still scared oftentimes. Michelle has been in meetings with me, and I'm like, I hope they don't hear my voice shaking. But
not once.
Just do it, right?
But you guys, we're all like that. And to be able to let these staff members know that, one of the important things to me with Shaquila and I and our relationship from the beginning, well, it took a little bit of time, and we did not work closely together, but it was equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it was Shaquila was the one that first started driving that to me, and Shaquila found out about the legislature really through a job fair, didn't you?
Yeah.
Like, you would have never thought about coming to the legislature if you had not had someone come to a job fair and talk to you about that.
Yeah, I was actually applying for jobs in DC. And I was applying for fellowships because I was in grad school and I was a couple classes away from finishing. And I started looking for fellowships because when I thought of working for lawmakers, I thought of going to DC. I didn't think of Lansing first, but I went to the MPP job fair at Michigan State, despite the fact that I wasn't a student at Michigan State. I just went, it was on the website, and I met the Senate Dems recruiter for their intern program, Nathan Murphy, and he offered me an internship, which I turned down. But I still shared my resume with him and ended up getting an interview. That's that lucky happenstance. I ended up in the right place at the right time.
And thank you very much for sharing as well, getting into a meeting and being scared that your voice is shaking. Every time before I do a panel like this, I'm sitting there saying to myself, okay, what am I doing? What am I going to say? What's going on? But you just get in there and you do it. And everyone's going to have a little bit of being nervous, you know, about what they're doing and what they're presenting. And it's just part of the business. Beth, Justice Clement, would you touch a little bit about, you said you've had a great career and you've had some great moments, but talk a little bit about the time earlier in your career, and this is when you and I worked together early on, but someone wasn't giving you the chance that you deserved, and you were not getting, you know, paid or compensated for the job that you were doing. And how did you kind of keep it all together without getting frustrated and just saying, I want to leave? There's a lot of staffers that will say stuff too, like, oh, well, that's not my job description. Well, we do have job descriptions, but we don't really have job descriptions because you're going to get thrown stuff. But just talk a little bit too about you going through that period of time. Well, and then all of a sudden now what that person might think of you now that you're a Supreme Court justice.
The first thing I would say is that I did get frustrated. I was very frustrated. But instead of, and this is the advice that I give to you know, young people in their career. You know, if you're not happy with your job, you need to first look at yourself. Are you not happy with your job because you have expectations that aren't realistic for where you're at in your career and what you've been able to do? Are you not happy with your job because of, you know, personnel issues or who you're working for where it's maybe not a good fit? Is there anything that you can do to change how you do things to make that fit better? Or is it really just not the right job for you? And if so, that's okay, right? If it's just not something that you're passionate about, or it's not where you see yourself going, that's okay. Do the best job you can while you're there, looking for the next thing. You know, my experience, I loved what I was doing, but yes, it was, you know, right at the beginning of my career when I came back to the Senate. You know, you know, had gotten married, and you know, a few years before that, we had a young family. And what, you know, I'm just going to say it. What was said to me when it became clear was that long ago when they published the salaries, right, which was like the biggest deal ever, and of course everybody looked, right, and so I get on there and I'm like, wait a minute, you know, I've got a law degree. I practiced, you know, in private practice for 4 years. And, you know, and I've been here for 2, and then I find out that someone that has just been hired and it is their first job ever, is making $15,000 more than me, a young gentleman. Now, I didn't have a problem with what he was getting paid, but I had a problem with what I was getting paid. And what was said to me was, well, your husband's a lawyer and he makes good money, so basically we can pay you less. It was incredibly frustrating. What I decided to do was to build relationships with members in the caucus. You know, I had mentioned that I was, you know, I'm an introvert, but I decided I want to be here and I want to do this work. I love public policy and I love law in government, and this is where I want to be, and this is where I'm, you know, I don't want to go back to family law. I don't want to go back and bill hours. This is what I'm happy doing. And so what I did was I went and did my best to develop relationships with various senators and with their staff. What can I help you with? You know, I know that, you know, I'm right now, this is what I'm tasked with doing, but I have an interest in this. Let me know if you need help with it. Going outside of what my job description was, to try different things. And that was recognized. You know, Senator Bishop is the one that asked me to come on board and be his legal counsel and take over all of the advice and consent that was being done by the Senate. And that's because, you know, I didn't say no. You need something done, I'm happy to do it. Did I have that frustration? Definitely. Thankfully, you know, everything changes. You never know what's going to happen, right? So you might get mad and say, you know, this isn't fair, I'm going to leave. Well, had I done that at the height of my frustration, I would have missed the opportunity, which happened 3 months later, for a change in leadership. I don't mean, you know, with the elected officials, but with staff, and someone coming in and reviewing all of that, and me having the opportunity to introduce myself, to say, this is what I've done here. Here are the relationships that I've built, the work that I've done, and can you please review this? And that's all it took. that's all it took. And all of a sudden, you know, I believe that I was properly compensated for the work that I was doing. It, you know, gave me hope that if you do your work, you do the right thing, and keep fighting for yourself, that you can get there. And that wasn't the only time that it happened. Unfortunately, it's happened again since then, and it's something that you have to be willing to fight for yourself. You can't do that if you let the frustration take over, and your attitude and your work ethic and your work product suffer because of it. Because then they're going to be able to say, well, you know, why would we give you a promotion? Why would we pay you more when it's clear that you're not satisfied and that you're not, you know, giving it your all?
Okay, thank you. Now, Emily, with all that you have done out there, which is a lot, you know, I mean, starting with communications in the House and then doing issue advocacy and then going to Michigan State, and you talk about your challenges. Which one was your biggest challenge? And was it harder to deal with some, I mean, because you really got yourself into, you know what I mean, a hot box situation, which a lot of these staff or members can do, you know what I mean, with voting a certain way on something. But how did you keep your composure and keep it all together, you know, for the university and for when you do issue advocacy?
Yeah, they were all different challenges, just in different ways. I mean, when I joined an agency and did issue advocacy, I'd never done anything but work as a staffer. So there were a lot of things I didn't know yet how to do. And was very grateful at the time. I was building a practice group with a gentleman who was from the Democratic caucus, but we had always worked so fantastically together that, you know, growing a business together was something I wanted to do with him. And we learned a lot. I made a ton of mistakes. We learned a lot along the way. I'm a big believer and always kind of evaluating and looking at your mistakes, because they are growth opportunities and everyone's going to make them. The challenge at the MEDC was, you know, learning more about parts of communications I didn't have experience in. So advertising and marketing and how those tactics really work in the greater scheme of selling a state or selling, you know, tourism, et cetera. And the challenges at Michigan State have been, you know, crisis, you know, full on crisis communication. And I've made a ton of mistakes while I've been here too. And some of them are very public mistakes that it isn't a great feeling, you know, to make those in front of everybody or on behalf of an institution that I'm trying very hard to serve in the right way. But you have to have a look. You can't have too thin of a skin about it. You have to be able to, you know, pick yourself up and brush off your knees and say, okay, I'm going to do better next time, or I've learned from this and I'm going to take it forward. Nobody's perfect. And I mean, I have to repeat that to myself sometimes too. Nobody's perfect, and it can be difficult, but you just have to keep going.
You do. And I do have to say, in this business, I mean, there are some people that are really not cut out for the job. You know what I mean? It's just not in your wheelhouse, and to be able to recognize that. But we are all going to make mistakes, and we are all going to learn from our mistakes, and we're going to be able to help other people. So, you know, some of my frustration too is, you know, some managers or some legislators, you know, sometimes people have a very little tolerance for mistakes, or realizing how big the mistake is, or is it really just something small and they make a big deal out of it? And, you know, kind of dealing with that can be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I can be that way when I'm managing my team sometimes too. I mean, in the communications field, right, everything we want to be very factual and accurate, and, you know, down to having typos in something or misstating a main fact in, you know, in a news story that all of a sudden starts creating its own mini crisis, and you have to, you know, hustle to make that correction. But I mean, we have to be empathetic to each other. I think that's something that COVID has helped bring out in many people. Is how can we be more empathetic to our coworkers, to people who are struggling in different ways. And I hope that's a lesson that we carry forward when we're back working together in person and in different ways, is to keep some of that empathy for each other.
Absolutely. Does anybody out there have any questions right now before we just keep talking?
I think there's a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, there is a question in the Q&A. Relationships, particularly across the aisle, have been highlighted a lot today. how have you handled a situation where you may have burnt a bridge or find the person individually odious or awful, disregarding their politics?
I'll take this one. I'm the lone damn here. So I had a situation where I was working on a large piece of legislation, and it was a big deal. It was a lot of money. It was $500 million. And the lead legislator on this legislation had good intentions. And it was something I was passionate about, and I burned a bridge with this person, and he has forgiven me, but I know I hurt his feelings. I said some words. And honestly, it could have cost me my job, because I am a staffer who basically said some very rude things to a member. But I also apologized immediately. I went to my boss. I told my boss what I said. I apologized to the member. I apologized publicly to that person, because the relationship is important. And that same person chaired an appropriations committee where I was trying to get an expansion of a program that wasn't a ton of money, but wasn't getting any traction. And I was able, at that time, I was legislative director for Senator Ananick, and the senator had his own priorities. This was something that I wanted to get done that wasn't, it benefited his district, but it wasn't one of his priorities. Because I think because of my humility, because I was able to admit I was wrong, I was able to talk to the senator and get that added to the budget, right? Like, you're always going to have to come back across that bridge. You can't burn the bridge and not rebuild it, because relationships matter. And even as a staffer, even though I'm not an elected official, right? But I still had to deliver things for my boss. I had to deliver things for members that I worked for, because even when I worked for Senator Ananick, I still had a dual role where I worked for the caucus too. So it was, again, I recognize that what I said was hurtful. It was not just a political shot. It was a personal shot against that person. And it's something that obviously you can tell I'm a little hesitant about, because I still recognize it's been 6 years, and it's still something that, one, he tells people when we're out in public, when we run into each other, he mentions that I said this thing. I apologize even then. But I recognize words hurt. Like, when you're a kid, your parents said sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Words hurt. They're permanent. You can't take it back. And so that was a valuable lesson. I usually am very thoughtful before I say anything, like, you're going to have to ask that person for a favor one day. It's just the business. I've always worked before the executive office. I worked in a minority my whole career. I was in the super minority at that time, because the Senate Dems we had 11 members. And during that time, we were always short at least one. At one point, we were short two. For people who weren't around, they were in jail. That's why. So it's often, you have to think very carefully before you say anything, before you say things in anger, because those are hard lessons. And it was, I was very worried. Again, I could have lost my job because I was out of line for saying that. So I completely recognize that now. Taught me a valuable lesson, not a mistake I'll ever make again.
Anybody else?
I mean, I appreciate you sharing that story, because it's hard to, look within yourself and realize that you've done that. And I think that is really helpful for people. Make mistakes. We're human. We get passionate about things. You're working late hours, which I know all of you are, and especially when you were in person. I remember, sleeping in the caucus room, because we were in session late, and people get upset and they get worked up. The only thing that I would add to that is, sometimes bridges are burned, and it's not because anyone has said anything or done anything. It's just because there's a difference of opinion, and that will happen. And some people aren't able to say, agree to disagree. You're doing your job, I'm doing my job. We don't agree. And you know what? That's okay. We're going to come together on the next thing and work together. And that's what I would urge all of you to keep in mind. You might not agree. You might not, quote unquote, win, this fight. But does it matter in the grand scheme of things? Because what if tomorrow or a year from now, you find yourself on the same side as someone, passionate about something that you really want to work on together, and all of a sudden, there's this rift or distance between you because you didn't agree on something prior. There's going to be things that political views that some people have that are really just that you maybe can't get past, right? And that's okay. It's okay to step away from folks like that if you really can't find a way to work with them. But if that's not the case, I think of, bridges burned. If you haven't done anything that needs to be repaired and it's simply just not agreeing, please keep in mind that you're going to want them to give you that same benefit the next time an opportunity presents itself to work together.
And really, we almost need to touch on it too, because as staffers, we have to remember that we are working for the representatives or the senators. And there's got to be, that respect for the system, that they are the elected officials and they are the ones, so does anybody have any advice on, you don't really argue with your boss and you don't, try to get into those kinds of fights, because we have a lot of people coming in, the House changes every 6 years. We have people coming in that have never done this job before and they don't know what it's all about, and just really how you kind of keep that all together and know when to stop talking and when to keep talking and to listen.
Remembering that this is an institution, right? This is not about you. It's not about any specific member. This is an institution. And, when you're communicating, whether it's with another staff person or with another member, that you have to, and I know that it sounds harsh, but you have to remember that you're a staff person. And that you're there to serve a purpose, and that people talk, right? I mean, if you might have someone, let's say another staff member that you just really cannot stand dealing with, you have to keep yourself in check because you don't know who their network is and who they talk with. Just do your best to be able to work with them so that nothing bad can be said about you because of choices or behavior that you exhibit towards someone that you struggle working with.
And also, everyone is just staff, right? Where if on a staff to staff level, I have had relationships with the furthest right members, staffs, or people that I politically didn't agree with, but we're all here to do a job. I mean, and some of us last past the term limits of our boss. And so you never know who the next person you might be working with, or that staffer may become a member one day. I knew Jeremy Moss when he was front desk for a state rep. I knew Adam Ollier when he was back desk for a state rep and chief of staff for a state senator. People run for office. They get the bug and they run for office. So the same person that you may be carrying have a grudge against may one day end up being your boss in the caucus or something. So that's another thing. I mean, this is in the era of term limits, the person you're sitting next to could be your boss one day.
Just to build off of what Beth said earlier, when you're a staff member, and Staci, to your question about, how do you approach, when you're working with your boss, you may not necessarily agree with them. You don't have an agenda when you're a staff member. Your agenda is your boss's agenda or your caucus's agenda or things along those lines. And you can only do your best to advise on your thoughts and provide, the research and the evidence, that for a position or, a vote or whatever you're working on that space. And if they, they're on a different page than you are, then that's okay. You just have to recognize at that point that they're in charge, they're making the decision. And if you're not comfortable with something like that, then, you can examine if there's a better fit for you elsewhere. But it's at the end of the day, it's not It's not about you in the legislature. It's about it's about it itself. It's about the legislature itself and the members and the two chambers.
And I would just add to that, Michelle Lang is, in my view, the model staffer for exhibiting exactly that. I've told her this for years. The reason I think she was so successful and so sought after, as she told you, like, her job hopping, it's because people sought her out, and it's because she did not have a personal agenda other than to do the best job for her boss and do the best thing that she could for the state of Michigan. And everyone recognized that. I have worked with people that did have their own personal agenda, and then you're left wondering, like, is the conflict because of that, or is it because we can't work together? And if you exhibit what Michelle has in her past and now, and just say, this is the job that I have to do. There were plenty of things that Michelle and I worked in the governor's office that we did not agree with. But if you have a boss that you feel like you can express your position and your argument and lay it out there, and you're heard, and they don't agree with you, they're the elected official. They get to not agree with you, but you just want to be heard. If it happens, to a point where you just are finding that the divide between you and who you're working for is so great that it's not a good fit, then find something else. But if it's, if you're agreeing with every single thing that your boss wants to do, I think you should question kind of whether you've really developed, professionally the way that you should be.
Staci, we've got a couple of questions in the box.
Yeah, for some reason, it's just not like pulling up right for me. Can you read them off, Arnold?
Sure can.
Thank
So
you.
one question is about networking. How did you do your networking, and what advice would you give someone on how to grow their network?
Well, I know when I go back and speak to especially students doing their undergrad, I'm always promoting jobs in Lansing and working, coming into state government, whether that's in the legislature or one of the departments, because there are so many people to meet. You are networking all the time, whether it's an official networking session where it's something that's after work and you go to a reception, or you meet people for happy hour or get together, or you're just working on an issue and you're in this big room with 10 other people and that you've never met before. You just start building such a huge network. And as evident by our panel, you meet people that you end up working with and being friends with maybe for 20 or 30 years, even as you each move around in your career in different ways. And I just think it's a great space to start your career off in Lansing, and it can lead to so many different paths.
And over the past year, we've had a hard time as far as networking, but that should start to ease up now. And there's going to be receptions that you can go to. There's just going to be other legislative events. There's going to be staff members that you're going to go do stuff with. And, at one point in time, maybe this MSU staff training can end up being in person again, but that kind of helps with the whole networking and everyone getting together. And make it a point to, once a month, go have coffee with someone new. Call up a lobbyist and say, can I come, talk to you and pick your brain a little bit about, what you do.
I think that's the best advice, Staci. I would urge anyone that is listening to get over your fear or your hesitation to call someone that you don't know. It's different now for me because it's mostly law students that are reaching out to me. But I never say no. If I have a law student reach out to me and say, can I please talk to you about the law and where my career can go, or how you got to where you are, my answer is always yes. And I would think you will find that across everyone in Lansing and in state government, that they are going to say yes, and they will be willing to do that. And yes, it's difficult right now because of COVID, but I have done a lot of these over Zoom. It's not ideal, but I'll tell you what, I can do a lot more of them because I don't have to leave my house, and I don't have, it's not competing with the rest of my schedule. So please get outside of your comfort zone and reach out to people that you have no connection with, and just do a little bit of background on them, figure out, who they are and why, what connections you might have or interests you might have. Reach out to them and ask them if they'd be willing to talk with you. And I think what you'll get is a resounding yes from, if not all, close to all of them.
Go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to say, to Beth's point again, get out of your bubble. Don't just, hang out. If you're a Senate Republican, don't just hang out with Senate Republicans. If you're, a House Democrat, don't just hang out with House Democrats. Meet the people that you're working with, every single day in the Capitol building or in the Hob. Go take a walk off of your floor in the Hob and go, see what's happening on a different floor and who's out there and what's going on. If I had only stuck to my small little Senate Republican bubble when I was in the legislature, I would have never developed a great relationship with Chris Kraft, who is now at Blue Cross. But there were times when her boss and my boss were not able to get along, but because of our relationship, we were able to help advance things and move the ball down the court and make sure that the state had some funding for various projects and what have you. But it was because of both of our willingness to make sure that we knew other people and we developed those relationships. So you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
A couple of questions about master's degrees. Any of you have any thoughts on whether folks should go back to school for a master's, or is the experience moving up more valuable?
I kind of knew when I started my career that if I got one, I was going to wait. I knew that I wasn't going to go straight from undergrad to graduate school. As I mentioned earlier, one of my motivations was because I ended up in a sector that's not really what I studied for undergrad. So I felt a master's was needed, but I also knew I wanted to be in management no matter where I was going. And a master's certainly helps with that. If getting into management is something you want to do, I would recommend it regardless of what the master's is in.
Shaquila?
Same. I would say same. My bachelor's degree is very different from what I do, and so I felt like my master's has opened the door for me in opportunities. At one point, I considered law school as well, and I think if you're trying to decide between the master's and law school, I would change the question a little bit. Think about what you want to do. Michelle said earlier she wanted something to fall back on if she ever left the legislature. I never wanted to practice law. I started studying for the LSAT and doing the practice test, and it forced me to ask myself, like, why do I want to go to law school? Do I ever want to practice? What is there a job in the legislature that I can't do that I want to do that a law degree helps me do? Well, I can't be legal counsel. I can't be a bill drafter, and I'm not going to the Supreme Court. I'm okay with all of those things. And so I decided to keep the 200K and not that I had it, but you know what I'm saying? I decided not to get the loans because no door is closed to me that I want to go through. So law school wasn't for me, but having the master's degree, I think, opens the doors to where I want to go or where I am right now. So.
It is, and it can be difficult, you guys. It's even like, you know what I mean, with your own kids or you guys, do you go get your bachelor's degree? Do you go to trade school? Do you go, after you get your bachelor's, get your master's? And I debated that for years, and I didn't do it because I had a young family too, and it was just, I worked full time and I worked a lot, and I just didn't have that in my wheelhouse to do that. But there's times where I've been disappointed that I couldn't apply for certain jobs because it required a master's degree. And I just wonder sometimes if I cut myself short, but I'm still very happy with what I've done and where I've gone and what's happening. And my light keeps shutting off. It leaves me in the dark.
Stace, I think you've answered your own question there. I mean, you said you're still happy and you're still, enjoying what you do. And I think that answers the question. Yes, I went to law school because I wanted to have something to fall back on if I ever needed it. It was expensive. There's no question about it. I don't regret a single minute or dollar of it, simply because I have found that any education is good. It helps, round you out. It makes you, it can make you a better, employee. I would never suggest it would make you a better person, but, because that's just, it's a piece of paper at the end of the day, but it develops it helps you develop the way you think about things. I may not practice law every day and I don't sit on a bench, like our good friend Justice Clement here, but it helps you think about things differently. It puts a different it allows you to put a different focus on it or a different filter on it so that you can see things, perhaps other people don't do. But I think the decision to whether or not to go back to school is something that it's personal to everyone. I mean, you have to weigh all of those factors. Do I wish that I would have thought a little harder about how much money it was going to cost me to go to law school? Yes. Would it have changed my approach at the end of the day? Probably not. But you need to think about it, and you need to think about how it's going to impact you going forward.
And Michelle worked full-time, went to law school full-time, and did the budget.
I only went part-time.
Okay, part-time, but then did the whole budget for Senator Majority Leader Mike Bishop. And I sit there and we worked together, and I would look at Michelle going, how do you do all this?
I was in a very fortunate spot where, Michigan State at the time was offering a night law school program. So I was able to do that after work. I won't lie and say that there weren't times when I was, not taking notes. I was doing, budget work for the majority leader, but my professor didn't know that. You couldn't see what was on my screen. But I was just very fortunate, and I didn't have a young family or small children that, would have been competing with the time that I needed for getting my degree.
I'll jump back in for 30 seconds and say, also, I have a ton of friends who are lawyers, and they have a deep-seated passion for the law. And that was another thing that, again, it just didn't, for me, it didn't fit. But I also think if you just can't stop thinking about going to law school, or you just can't stop thinking about pursuing, an MBA or MPA, do it. The time's going to pass. I've had friends, oh, I'm too old. Oh, I have young kids. I have all these other obligations. Take one class at a time. The time is going to pass. And do you want to wake up 10 years from now and have your law degree, even if it took 5 years? Or do you still want to be thinking about what you could do? And I think that finally was the deciding factor for me. Like, am I going to miss not having this? No. And so I didn't do it. But I think I have a couple of friends who all they can think about is, I want to go to law school. Just go. I mean, it's not that easy. Obviously, you got to make decisions. But I wanted to simplify it a little bit that, you have to make that decision.
We have a question about employee-employer relationships. And we've all had a lot of bosses, having worked in the legislature and state government. Have you ever had a situation where your boss was extremely critical of your work, but really wasn't able to provide guidance on how to better meet their expectations? And if so, how did you handle that?
Yes. And I ended up eventually leaving that legislator. I think there are times out there, we can't be overreactive at first. You know what I mean? Especially when you're just starting, and, people are going to come in with different personalities here, and people are going to, some people don't know what's going on themselves as a legislator, so they tend to take it out on staff. And it's just like the learning curve of it. But yes, if I'm in a situation like that, I want my boss to believe in me, and I want my boss to let me grow. And if that's not going to happen, then it's not the right situation for me. So you really, if you've given it everything that you can in that situation, and no one's offering, suggestions or anything, number one, they don't know what to offer, is my guess, or they just don't really know how to work or manage people.
I'm going to put on my lawyer hat, although this is not legal advice, but, the question touched on, to the point of being offensive. If you're in a work environment that you feel that it is hostile, and that the criticism goes beyond, constructive criticism, and you're not getting any, any direction, please reach out to folks that can help you navigate that. No one deserves to be in a situation where they're being offended, or criticized to the level of it impacting them personally or professionally. So, please, if that's going on, there are other people in, and I know that it's hard to do, but please do it. There's people that can help you navigate that and potentially find you a better fit, and if it's just not working, it doesn't mean that it rises to the level of, anything formal, but can help you find a better fit.
And our door is always open in the House of Representatives Business Office and Human Resources. We are absolutely here to listen to you and try to navigate this.
I was just going to say that. I mean, the House Business Office and HR and the Senate Business Office and their HR have come so far in recent years that it's amazing. Like, I think the work they're doing is great. These trainings like this and opportunities like this did not exist when I was on staff. I mean, that was, we're looking at like, I don't know, 11 years ago when I was on staff. And these are amazing opportunities. And so, I would encourage you all, if there's any situations you're uncomfortable, to definitely reach out to the business offices for your.
I just want to reiterate what Michelle just said. As someone who was on staff much longer time ago than Michelle, Staci and the House and the Senate have done a great job on working to provide such services now to employees. Very important. There was little recognition way back when.
In addition to seeking out help, though, I think if it's an opportunity, anytime you're learning how to work for different people, you're just also advancing yourself. You're going to have a lot of different bosses. Arnold and I were kind of joking earlier about all the leadership changes we've gone through, both when we were staffers or our different places or not. I've been at MSU 3 years and I'm on my third president, since I've been here. So if you can weather through and transition through different leadership styles, you are growing professionally through that too, and being able to read people, being able to kind of understand how different people work and how working with this boss is different from someone else. So outside of it being just an extremely emotional or maybe, physically abusive situation, if you can take an opportunity, if it's a tough boss and you're like, well, I feel like I'm not doing what they want and I'm struggling to maybe to understand. I mean, Staci mentioned it earlier, if there's a mentor or someone you can reach out to just to say, help me try to figure out how to work with this person better. Because if you can get through it, you are going to grow professionally and be stronger at the end of that.
Staci, we're getting close to wrapping up. If you want to ask folks for some closing comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to touch on a couple things because through this whole process, all four of you have been extremely humble in your journey through all of this. And, Shaquila, I look up to you and I'm so honored to have you be chief of staff for the lieutenant governor. And it really touched me when you met Kamala Harris and you were like, oh my gosh, I get to meet you and whatever. You are going to be a Kamala Harris someday. You know what I mean? We all are going to be that person. And these people just want to, come and mentor you and guide you to that next step. And it's just amazing, the people that we have out there and everything that they can do. And I'm so honored to know all of you. And is there anything else you guys want to touch on? And I know you guys are all available if anybody has any questions after the fact.
Always. I would just say on staff, being on staff in the legislature was amazing. I loved it. It was hard and it was challenging, and it has its ups and downs, but the ups always I would say beat out the downs. And it just the variety of things you get to work on, the impact you get to have on residents in Michigan is not an opportunity that everyone gets to do. And I just encourage you to enjoy it and work hard at it and see what you can get done for Michigan.
And I agree. We talked about this. We've all been through transitions, what I mean, with bosses ending, or term limits. And we've thought we've been in the best job we've ever had, and then something else comes along and it does get better. And, sometimes there was that one job that was just outstanding. You'll never have it back. But there are so many things out there that you can experience and learn that it's just amazing.
I think that's a great point, Staci. I remember, I had been in the legislature for a number of years. I remember getting the call from who was going to be the governor's chief legal counsel asking me if I was going to apply to be a deputy. And I hadn't even thought about it. And, I started thinking about it, and I was nervous. I didn't want to leave what I knew, right? I knew how to do that job. I loved it. I loved the people that I worked with, the relationships that I had. And I didn't know what the governor's legal counsel, deputy legal counsel did. Like, what does that mean? I had no idea. And thankfully I had tremendous mentors and friends that, that supported me and pushed me instead of, of course you can do this. Yeah, it might take you a little while to figure out what it is. And I'm so thankful that I made that jump, because I wouldn't be where I am today without pushing myself beyond what my own comfort was.
I agree with Michelle. Like, this job, my time in the legislature was the most fun I've ever had in a professional capacity. I have had some really great bosses. I have had, I've learned a lot about myself. I've had some challenges. I have, I had an opportunity at one point, and I did a little bit of a trial run to work for a senator to be their chief of staff. And we quickly found out we didn't suit. But I liked him as a person. I worked with him for as long as he was in the legislature. But even that taught me a lot about myself. And it is, I have made some amazing relationships with people, and people that I didn't think would mentor me have, taken me under their wings, and they've guided me and they've given me advice. And I still call those people. And so younger staffers talk to me and they say, I feel bad. You never tell me your problems. And I'm like, trust me, there are lots of people who have been doing this longer than I have, who are the folks that still listen to me and let me cry on their shoulder. So I really think that's been the best part of this, is these relationships. And there are some really cool parts of this job, and there are some really not cool parts of this job, but you kind of got to do both to have, to get the whole experience. And Staci, to your point, like, I met the vice president when she was running for president, and she took the time out to give me advice as a staffer, right? And I was like, this is crazy. This lady is running for president of the United States. And she was giving me advice and talking to me about my position as chief of staff. And that was very cool. But also that day, I probably worked 20 hours, and I ended up driving the lieutenant governor and picking up people and as chief of staff. So it's kind of like your day there are lots of highs and lows, but it's such a cool experience that I wouldn't trade. And yeah, that's my advice. Like, enjoy the ride.
Is there any other questions, Arnold?
You're on mute, Arnold.
I'm muted now. A lot of comments thanking you for your time. And certainly this has been one of the better sessions that we've had. So thank you, Staci, for bringing this group together. Just a couple of comments or questions about, folks that are an intern or starting their career later in life, and how do you advance opportunities? And I think a lot of what I heard today is just keep networking, keep meeting people, and be open to that. So I don't know if there's any other advice folks have.
I saw the question about someone that gets into this field later in life. And I don't know how things are working now, because I've been out of the legislature for a long time. But I can tell you that when I worked in the legislature, and then when I worked in the executive branch, there were a lot of people that came in because of changes with elected officials that had never been part of state government, and came in. And I always really appreciated what they brought and the perspective that they brought. And the fact that, they didn't have any, I don't want to call it baggage, but I can't think of another word right now, of the history of some relationships and reputation of, people or organizations in government. And they were able to, ask questions that, that they were asking maybe because they were new. But some of those questions I was like, that's a great question. I don't know why it's done that way. So, for those of you that are on this, that did enter this, at a later stage in life, you have a lot to offer. Again, I don't know where things are and how it works with turnover about, where those staffers go. So maybe Staci has more insight into that, but I appreciate that you're doing this, and I promise you that you are bringing something to the table that wouldn't be there if it was just lifelong, long-term staffers.
Exactly.
Well, thank you all again. Thank you, Staci, like I said, for putting together a fantastic panel. Appreciate all the work that everybody does. And we're going to take a 5-minute break and join us at 2:20 for our next session on the Independent Redistricting Commission. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.